17-year-old Rachel gripped the frayed edges of her mother's leather journal, her hands numb against the biting Seattle wind. She was starving, evicted, and utterly alone. But as a hidden page fluttered onto the wet concrete, tracing a cryptic path across the city, Rachel realized she wasn't destitute. She was targeted. The rain in Seattle didn't fall. It existed as a permanent, freezing mist that seeped through every layer of clothing you owned. For Rachel Stratford, currently huddled beneath the brutalist concrete awning of a closed bank in Pioneer Square, that mist was a death sentence. It was November 14th, exactly 3 months since the bank had foreclosed on their tiny apartment in Ballard. Exactly 3 months and 4 days since her mother, Abigail, had drawn her last, rattling breath in a sterile room at Swedish Medical Center, her body consumed by an aggressive lymphoma that the insurance company had deemed pre-existing. At 17, Rachel was a ghost in the system. The foster care apparatus was overwhelmed, and Rachel, terrified of being shoved into a group home, had simply slipped through the cracks. She survived on half-eaten bagels, scavenged from the dumpsters behind artisan bakeries and the fleeting warmth of public transit vents. Her entire life was reduced to a navy blue JanSport backpack. Inside were 2 pairs of socks, a stolen fleece blanket, a toothbrush, and the only piece of her mother she had left, a battered black moleskin journal. Abigail Stratford had been a quiet woman, a bookkeeper for a string of failing local restaurants. She was deeply pragmatic, rarely given to flights of fancy or emotional outbursts. Yet, in the weeks before her death, the pain medications had untethered her mind. She would clutch Rachel's hand, her skin like translucent parchment, and whisper feverishly about the architecture, the fail-safes, and a man named Arthur Sterling. Rachel had chalked it up to the morphine. When Abigail died, she left behind $43 in a checking account and a mountain of medical debt. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the square, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Rachel pulled her hood down, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. Officer Miller, she knew his face from the daytime sweeps, was looking for vagrants to push out of the commercial district. Once the taillights faded around the corner of Yesler Way, she exhaled a breath that plumed white in the freezing air. Unable to sleep, she pulled the moleskin from her bag. She didn't have a flashlight, relying instead on the sickly amber glow of the street lamp overhead. She had read the journal a dozen times. It was mostly filled with mundane budgeting, grocery lists, utility bills, notes on her shifting work schedule. But tonight, driven by a desperate need to feel close to her mother, Rachel dug her freezing thumbnails into the heavy leather binding, testing its weight. It was thicker than it should have been. Rachel paused. She ran her fingers along the back cover. The moleskin had a built-in accordion pocket at the back, but she had already emptied that out. It had contained nothing but an old Polaroid of the 2 of them at Alki Beach. But as she pressed her thumb against the very spine, the inner lining gave way with a faint, dry crack. The leather had been meticulously sliced and glued back together. Her heart hammered a chaotic rhythm against her ribs. With trembling, ice-cold fingers, she peeled back the false backing. A thick, folded piece of architectural vellum slipped out, landing on her damp jeans. Along with it came a small, plastic-sealed card. Rachel picked up the card first. It was a proximity key card, completely blank except for a faded corporate logo etched into the bottom right corner, a shield intersected by a lightning bolt. Aegis Solutions, the name her mother had mumbled in her final, morphine-laced days. Rachel carefully unfolded the vellum. It wasn't a standard map with latitude and longitude. It was a hand-drawn blueprint of the Seattle Central Library. Her mother's precise, tight handwriting covered the margins in red ink. "If you are reading this, Rachel, it means the fail-safe has triggered. It means I am dead, and Arthur didn't keep his end of the bargain. I am so sorry I left you in the dark. I had to keep you safe. Go to the red floor. Find the book that doesn't belong. Dewey Decimal, 720.94. The combination is my anniversary." Rachel stared at the paper, the freezing rain entirely forgotten. Her mother had never been married. She had always told Rachel that her father was a brief, meaningless fling who had died in a motorcycle accident before she was born. There was no anniversary. Wait. Rachel closed her eyes, forcing her exhausted brain to work. Abigail hadn't been married, but she celebrated a different anniversary. Every year on August 12th, Abigail would buy a single expensive cupcake, light a candle, and say, "To the day we broke the chains." Rachel had always thought it was the day she quit smoking. 0812. The words on the vellum shifted from the ramblings of a dying woman into a terrifyingly clear directive. Her mother hadn't been a simple bookkeeper. The sheer precision of the map, the hidden keycard, the mention of Aegis Solutions, a billion-dollar cybersecurity firm headquartered downtown, painted a picture of a woman Rachel didn't know. A low rumble of thunder echoed across the Puget Sound. Rachel carefully folded the vellum and tucked it, along with the keycard, deep into the front pocket of her jeans. She packed the journal away and stood up, her joints screaming in protest against the cold. The library didn't open for another 6 hours. She needed to keep moving to stay warm. For the first time in 3 months, she wasn't just walking aimlessly to survive the night. She had a destination. At 9:55 a.m., Rachel stood shivering outside the colossal glass and steel geometric structure of the Seattle Central Library. Compared to the sleek, purposeful professionals and well-dressed university students filing through the doors, she looked exactly like what she was. A street kid. Her jeans were mud-stained at the hems, her jacket was too thin, and a faint odor of damp wool and unwashed hair clung to her. She kept her head down, avoiding the eyes of the security guard as she slipped through the revolving doors. The sudden blast of heated air inside almost made her knees buckle. She didn't stop to relish it. She marched straight for the neon yellow escalators. Her mother's note had specified the red floor, level 4. It was a notoriously disorienting space, painted entirely in varying, aggressive shades of crimson and burgundy, housing the library's meeting rooms and administrative spaces. But the Dewey Decimal number, 720.94, belonged to European architecture. That was on level 8, part of the continuous book spiral. Rachel stopped on level 4, standing in the monochromatic red hallway. Why would the map say, "Go to the red floor, but give a call number for level 8? She pulled the vellum from her pocket, ignoring a passing librarian who gave her a suspicious look. She scrutinized the blueprint. The drawing of the red floor had a small, microscopic asterisk near a maintenance corridor. Beside it, in tiny script, "The spine is the key. Look under the skin." Rachel walked down the aggressively red hallway toward the maintenance doors. The area was deserted, the acoustics deadened by the thick red carpet. She found a ventilation grate near the floorboards, painted the exact same shade of crimson. She dropped to her knees. To anyone else, it was just a vent. But Rachel noticed that the bottom right screw was missing. Using the rigid edge of the Aegis Solutions keycard, she pried at the metal casing. It popped open with a metallic clatter. She reached her hand into the dusty, dark ductwork. Her fingers brushed against something hard and wrapped in heavy plastic. She pulled it out. It was a hollowed-out, faux leather book spine, a dummy book designed to hold valuables. It had a 4-digit mechanical padlock built into the clasp. Her hands shook as she dialed in the numbers. 0812. The lock clicked open. Inside was a thick, sealed envelope and a heavy, vintage brass key stamped with the letters KSS 402. Rachel tore open the envelope. The letter inside was written on expensive, heavy stock paper. It wasn't written in her mother's usual hurried scrawl. It was written with the deliberate, heavy strokes of someone making a final confession. My dearest Rachel, if you are reading this, the worst has happened. You think I was a bookkeeper? I was, in a way. I kept the books for Arthur Sterling, but not for restaurants. 15 years ago, Arthur and I co-founded Aegis Solutions. I wrote the foundational encryption code that the entire company is built upon. Arthur was the charismatic face. I was the ghost in the machine. When the company was preparing to go public, Arthur realized my code was too powerful to share the patent. He framed me for corporate espionage, threatening to have you taken away from me by Child Protective Services if I didn't sign over my shares and disappear. I was a single mother. I panicked. I took a buyout of $100,000 and vanished into a life of poverty to protect you. But I didn't leave him with the full code. I built a back door into the Aegis mainframe, a kill switch. Arthur has spent the last decade hunting for the master drive. He thought it was destroyed. It isn't. The key enclosed belongs to King Street Station, Locker 402. Inside is what you need to survive, and the first piece of the drive. Do not trust the police. Arthur practically owns the cybercrime division. Get the bag and follow the next thread. I love you. Mom. Rachel stopped breathing. The words blurred together as tears finally spilled over her dirt-smudged cheeks. Her mother hadn't been a failure. She had been a genius, extorted and broken by a billionaire. The poverty that had defined Rachel's entire life, the eviction, the lack of medical care that ultimately killed her mother. It was all engineered by Arthur Sterling. Rage, pure and blindingly hot, replaced the cold in her veins. She shoved the letter and the brass key into her backpack, leaving the dummy book on the red carpet. She had to get to King Street Station. The station was a sprawling, historic brick building, just south of Pioneer Square. It was bustling with commuters boarding Amtrak trains. Rachel navigated the crowds, her eyes darting nervously, checking every man in a suit, wondering if they worked for Sterling. She found the archaic wall of luggage lockers near the secondary restrooms. They were relics, mostly out of use, replaced by modern digital lockers, but a few banks of the old brass key lockers remained for long-term leaseholders. She found number 402. The brass key slid into the lock perfectly. She turned it, and the heavy metal door swung open with a squeak that sounded deafening to her ears. Inside sat a heavy, black canvas duffel bag. Rachel grabbed the handles and hauled it out. It was shockingly heavy. She carried it into a vacant bathroom stall, locking the door behind her. Sitting on the tiled floor, she unzipped the main compartment. She gasped, slapping a hand over her own mouth to stifle the sound. Stacked neatly in shrink-wrapped bundles were $100 bills, 10 bundles, $50,000 in untraceable cash. Next to the money sat a sleek, black burner phone, a forged Washington State driver's license with her photo, but the name Sarah Jenkins, and a heavy encrypted USB drive made of titanium. Underneath the drive was a final piece of cardstock. It bore a single address, 1145 Medina Point Drive. It was the wealthiest zip code in Washington State. It was where the billionaires lived. Before Rachel could process the sheer magnitude of the cash sitting in her lap, the black burner phone suddenly lit up. The harsh buzzing vibrated against the bathroom tiles. The caller ID was blocked. Her mother had been dead for 3 months. No one was supposed to know this phone existed. Rachel stared at the glowing screen, her heart hammering wildly. Hesitantly, she reached out and swiped the green icon to answer. She didn't say a word. For a moment, there was only the sound of static and shallow breathing on the other end of the line. Then, a smooth, deeply resonant male voice spoke. "I knew Abigail was too clever to just die," the man said, his tone dripping with mock affection. "I have to admit, Rachel, I didn't think the little street rat had the brains to crack the library puzzle. Look outside the bathroom window." Panic seized her throat. Rachel scrambled to her feet, balancing on the toilet seat to peer out the small, frosted window that overlooked the station's parking lot. Sitting directly across the street, idling in a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, was a man in a tailored charcoal suit holding a cell phone to his ear. "Keep the money, sweetheart," Arthur Sterling's voice purred through the speaker. "But bring me the drive. You have 10 seconds to walk out the front doors, or I send my men in, and trust me, they won't be checking out library books." The line clicked dead. 10 seconds. Rachel's mind raced as Arthur Sterling's threat echoed against the cheap tile of the bathroom stall. She didn't have a weapon, she didn't have backup, and she was trapped in a public restroom with $50,000 in illicit cash. She shoved the shrink-wrapped bundles of $100 bills, the heavy titanium USB drive, the forged ID, and the burner phone deep into her ratty navy JanSport. She left the heavy canvas duffel sitting open on the floor. Sterling was watching the front doors. He expected a terrified, homeless teenager to walk out with her hands up. Rachel climbed onto the toilet seat and examined the frosted window. It was small, hinged at the top, and layered with decades of grime. She pushed against the rusted latch. It groaned, then snapped loose. The window swung outward, revealing not the front parking lot, but a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway that ran parallel to the train tracks. She squeezed her shoulders through the narrow opening, the rough brick scraping the sides of her ribs. She plummeted 6 feet into the alley, landing hard on a pile of sodden cardboard. Pain flared in her ankle, but she bit down on her lip, tasting blood, and forced herself up. She didn't look back. She sprinted down the alley, blending into a crowd of disembarking passengers, flooding out of the station's rear concourse. 2 hours later, Rachel Stratford ceased to exist. Using $300 of the cash, she had walked into a high-end department store downtown. She discarded her damp, mud-stained clothes in a fitting room, replacing them with dark designer jeans, a thick cashmere turtleneck, and a tailored wool trench coat. She scrubbed the grime from her face and brushed the knots out of her dark hair in the store's luxurious restroom. When she looked in the mirror, the starving street kid was gone. Staring back was Sarah Jenkins, a wealthy, polished young woman who belonged in the glass towers of Seattle. She paid for a room at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in cash, using the fake ID. The sudden immersion into luxury, the plush carpets, the aggressive heat, the soft, clean sheets, was dizzying, but she couldn't rest. She sat at the mahogany desk, ordered a black coffee from room service, and pulled out the titanium drive. She needed to know what was waiting for her in Medina. She used a portion of the cash to purchase a high-end laptop from a nearby electronics store. When she plugged the titanium drive into the port, the screen immediately went black. A single line of white text appeared. Password. She tried 0812. Incorrect. She tried Aegis. Incorrect. She tried her mother's name. Incorrect. Rachel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her mother was methodical. She wouldn't have left the password to chance, nor would she have made it something easily guessable by Arthur Sterling. She pulled the moleskin journal from her backpack and flipped to the last entry Abigail had ever written. It was a single, cryptic sentence. The strongest foundations are built on the greatest lies. What was the greatest lie Abigail had ever told her? Rachel's breath hitched. She typed a single phrase into the prompt. My father. The screen flashed green. A massive directory of encrypted files unfolded, but they were all locked behind a secondary biometric wall. However, one single document was left unencrypted. It was a property deed. 1145 Medina Point Drive. It wasn't a residential home. It was listed as a subterranean data storage facility owned by a shell corporation tied to Aegis Solutions. It was Arthur Sterling's off-site black box, the physical server farm where he kept the data too illegal to store on the cloud. If Abigail had built a kill switch, this was the only place it could be deployed to infect the entire Aegis network. At 11 p.m., Rachel took an Uber Black across the 520 floating bridge. The rain had intensified, lashing against the car windows as they entered Medina, the billionaire enclave that housed tech titans and foreign royalty. The driver dropped her off at the end of a winding, private road. Number 1145 looked like an architectural masterpiece from the outside, a low-slung, modernist structure of dark wood and black glass, completely obscured by towering Douglas firs. There were no lights on. Rachel approached the heavy steel gate. A red scanner glowed menacingly in the dark. She pulled the Aegis Solutions keycard from her pocket, the one hidden in the journal. Her hand trembled as she held it to the glass. A soft chime cut through the rain. The gate clicked, swinging inward. Abigail's master access still worked. Rachel stepped onto the property, the gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. The front door of the house was a massive slab of matte black metal. The keycard worked there, too. She slipped inside, the heavy door sealing shut behind her with a pneumatic hiss, plunging her into pitch darkness. The air inside the house was freezing, heavily air-conditioned to keep the servers from overheating. Rachel flicked on a small pen light she had purchased, its beam cutting through the gloom. The house was entirely devoid of furniture. It was a hollow shell. She found a reinforced steel door at the end of the hallway leading downward. She descended 2 flights of concrete stairs, arriving in a massive, cavernous basement. Row upon row of towering black server racks hummed with a deafening, rhythmic vibration. Blue LED lights blinked like thousands of digital eyes. In the center of the room sat a single, glowing terminal desk. Rachel walked toward it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled the titanium drive from her pocket. All she had to do was plug it in and execute the program. I have to admit, the coat is a massive improvement over the garbage you were wearing this morning. The voice boomed through the server room, amplified by the concrete walls. The overhead fluorescent light slammed on, blinding Rachel. She spun around. Standing at the base of the stairs was Arthur Sterling. He was a tall, impeccably groomed man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Rachel had seen in her entire life. Flanking him was Bradley Carmichael, a massive, stone-faced man with a suppressed pistol drawn and leveled directly at Rachel's chest. "Did you really think you could just walk into my primary data vault?" Sterling asked, walking slowly toward her, his footsteps echoing over the hum of the servers. The moment that dead woman's keycard pinged the front gate, my security network alerted me. "You didn't break in, Rachel. You just delivered the drive exactly where I needed it." Rachel backed up until her hips hit the terminal desk. "My mother built this company," she spat, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the terror threatening to choke her. "You stole it from her. You bankrupted her. You killed her." Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I didn't give her cancer, sweetheart. I just made sure her insurance wouldn't cover the treatment. It was a business decision. Abigail was a brilliant coder, but she was weak. She wanted to open source the Aegis encryption. She wanted to give away $1 trillion technology for free. I couldn't let her do that. So you framed her, Rachel said, gripping the edge of the desk. I did. Sterling nodded, stopping 10 feet away. He snapped his fingers, and Carmichael stepped forward, the gun still aimed at Rachel. Now, put the drive on the desk. You're going to plug it in, and you're going to input the decryption key so I can finally scrub her little virus from my network. And if I don't? Sterling tilted his head, his eyes turning cold. Rachel, look at me. Look closely. Do you not see the resemblance? The air in the room seemed to vanish. Rachel stared at the man's sharp jawline, the aggressive slope of his brow, the dark, piercing eyes. A wave of profound nausea washed over her. Yes, Sterling said softly, enjoying the horror blooming on her face. Abigail never told you. She thought she was protecting you. When she got pregnant, I told her to handle it. A child was a liability. She refused. She threatened to expose our relationship to the board. So, I took everything from her. You aren't just a street rat, Rachel. You are my greatest mistake. Now plug in the drive. Tears pricked Rachel's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The man standing in front of her wasn't a father. He was a monster. He was the reason she had spent the last 3 months freezing on concrete. He was the reason she had watched her mother wither away in agony. She turned around, plugged the titanium USB into the terminal, and typed in the password, "My father." The screen flared to life, casting a harsh white glow across her face. A system prompt appeared. Aegis kill switch engaged, awaiting final execution. Press enter to confirm. Sterling stepped up right behind her, peering over her shoulder. Good girl. Now press it. Let's wipe Abigail's ghost from the machine once and for all. Rachel hovered her finger over the enter key. You said my mother was weak, she whispered. You said she was just a coder. She was, Sterling scoffed. No, Rachel said, her voice dropping to a dead calm. She was an architect, and an architect never builds a door without knowing exactly where it leads. Rachel smashed the enter key. The screen didn't go black. Instead, thousands of lines of code began scrolling at light speed. The blue lights on the server racks instantly snapped to a violent, flashing red. A mechanical siren began to wail through the subterranean room. Sterling shoved Rachel aside, frantically slamming his hands on the keyboard. What did you do? Carmichael, stop it! Unplug it! Carmichael lunged forward and ripped the USB drive from the port. It didn't matter. The execution was already complete. It wasn't a virus to destroy your network, Rachel said, backing away toward the emergency exit behind the server racks. It was a broadcast protocol. My mother didn't just hide her code. She spent the last 15 years tracking yours. Sterling stared at the monitors in absolute horror. The screens were displaying outbound transmission logs. Terabytes of data were being violently extracted from the servers and beamed directly to the servers of the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the editorial desks of every major global news syndicate. She found the blackmail, Rachel shouted over the sirens. She found the illegal wiretaps, the offshore accounts, the bribes to the cybercrime division. She packaged it all up, and you just gave me the biometric clearance to send it. Kill her! Sterling screamed, his face purple with rage, pointing at Rachel. Carmichael raised his weapon, but before he could pull the trigger, the reinforced steel door at the top of the stairs blew open with a deafening explosion. SWAT teams in full tactical gear poured down the concrete stairwell, their assault rifles raised, laser sights cutting through the red emergency lights. FBI, drop your weapons! Get on the ground! Carmichael, a mercenary to his core, instantly dropped his pistol and fell to his knees, lacing his fingers behind his head. Sterling stood frozen, his eyes locked on the terminal screens as his empire, his wealth, and his freedom evaporated in real time. In the chaos of the raid, as federal agents swarmed the billionaire and pinned him to the floor, no one noticed the teenager in the cashmere coat slipping out through the rear maintenance egress. Rachel walked out into the freezing Medina rain. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket. It had a single new message. An automated alert triggered the moment the kill switch was executed. Transfer complete. Original founder shares liquidated. $342,500,000 deposited to secure offshore trust. Beneficiary, Sarah Jenkins. Rachel stared at the screen, the rain mixing with the tears streaming down her face. She wasn't just safe. She was free. Rachel stood on the deck of her new waterfront home, the morning sun burning away the Seattle mist. She was no longer a ghost haunting the city's damp streets. The billions in recovered stock had destroyed Arthur Sterling, but it had resurrected Abigail's legacy. Sipping her coffee, Rachel touched the heavy leather of her mother's journal. They had finally broken the chains, and the future was entirely hers.